for the fabulous Dev. Over to yourself.
Thank you, Sarah. And you thanked us, but I think the biggest round of thanks goes to you and your team for actually pulling this whole thing together. You know, we are merely here to come in, have a little, share our thoughts, and then off we go. But you and your team have been absolutely fantastic. In one, setting up that website. We know you went against the grain to do that, so bravo. And then also bringing together so many wonderful people into a conference like this, much needed. So we've got your back for all the future conferences that happen after this. Cool. So without further ado, I'm going to share my slides, and I promise this is not death by slides, because I have 10 minutes to talk to you, and then most of this is Q&A. So Sarah very quickly alluded to that there was a workshop that happened between 1 and 3 p.m. UK time. That workshop was called Man versus Machine. And in the process of constructing that workshop, we realized that that probably wasn't a very good title to call a workshop that had no intention of putting man versus machine. And also man is a very single gender type, and we certainly didn't have just one gender in that workshop. So we botched it and put man plus machine. And so it's not sadly, Sarah, the man or woman didn't beat the machine or vice versa, but we found how and where harmony can be discovered between the two. So really quickly about who we are at nplan. So I'll tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, cover quickly how it works, and then tell you where it works, like sort of case studies, if you will. So who we are, we're a data-driven risk analysis company. We provide forecasting using past schedule data on construction projects. And the purpose behind this, the reason we exist, the reason all of us, all 50 of us, choose to come to work every day, is that we are here to inspire the world to forecast correctly and empower it to tackle risk. And that ultimately builds towards this grand vision, a vision that, you know, can never really be achieved, but you constantly work towards it. And that is to build a world where ambitions are no longer limited by our understanding of risk. So if you dissect that a little bit, we as a world don't do stuff, and I'm using the word stuff as a very generic word, but you can make it more technical by extrapolating it to the built environment. So we don't build assets or infrastructure for the planet, sometimes because we have a weak understanding of the risks involved. So we perceive it to be too risky, that would be outlandish to create a hyperloop to go around the UK by 2035. That is a perception that it is too risky to do something like that. Yet the public utility, if we were able to deliver it to time and to budget, would be astronomical. I'm sure we'd all love a 15-minute journey to Manchester. So the problem is building these construction projects that we know today is really complex. The little screenshot on the left is a Gantt chart, a schedule file, and it depicts a really simple project, actually. It's a little tower that costs no more than £15 million to build. And you can quickly tell there are lots of things going on. There are lots of interrelationships between these activities. And so understanding that is quite difficult for most of us. But to make the problem even worse, it's hard to exacerbate the problem. You have this broken learning cycle that exists in the industry. This means in order to create a valid project schedule or a timeline for your project, you need to have enough experience to do that. Most of us didn't get taught at university how long it typically takes to pour 400 cubic yards of concrete. And what might go wrong if you're pouring that concrete in London during December. Most of those battle scars, if you will, are picked up with experience, which sadly you can't accelerate. You know, to go get experience, you just have to spend the time on construction projects. You have to see them, you have to plan them and see them through to delivery, which takes a long time. So for as long as you're making assumptions that lead to a weak outcome or your assumption was invalid, and that cycle time taking really long to come back to you and to apply it to the next project, we've got what is known as a broken learning loop in the industry, or a very long cycle learning loop. I was once told, if I want, my original career was project delivery. I was a project manager at Shell. And I was once told that if I wanted my next promotion, I would have had to spend an additional 15 years executing refinery projects. And I was like, man, that's a long time to spend before I get my next promotion. Great company to work for, but this notion that you needed experience was crippling, if anything. So what we do at nplan is we've learned how lots of past projects have performed by reading their project schedule data, applying machine learning to it, and then the machine learning can tell a project team, based on everything I've learned, I use the word I to describe the machine now, how long might the project take, what might go wrong with it, and what could one do to capture risk or to mitigate risk or capture opportunities. It's a cold-eyed review based on past data that is unbiased. All of this, of course, is it has to have lots of past data. nplan by now, oh, my internet connection is unstable. Hope I'm still
We've got
back.
you back. We've got you back, Dev. It's all
Okay.
good.
All right. And we've now processed just over 500,000 projects covering $1.2 trillion of construction spend, which is the largest volume of past project data held anywhere on the planet. So this thing knows a lot about how past projects have performed. So it has some view of how current and future projects might perform. And that data comes from large contractors and owner operators around the world. If you recognize some of the logos on the screen, you'll know that they spend a lot of money building stuff. They also receive a lot of pain when these projects don't go so well. So hence the reason for them sharing data with us, and hence the reason a product like this even exists. So for those that know schedule risk analysis, it is currently done in a somewhat subjective, experience-based manner, meaning you pull lots of people into a room and say, use this wonderful piece of software to figure out what you think might happen to this project, and then the software delivers a simulation output. It takes between hours and weeks in order to do that, and it's subjective, which means that you have biases inbuilt to it. Of course, there's the dirty option, which is really fast, which is just ignore that all risks exist and sail away. And then nplan is this objective data-driven method that is faster than doing it traditionally, but more importantly, it's objective. And being objective about something helps us cut away our cognitive biases. And this is what I'll talk to you about in what happened in the workshop that ended 25 minutes ago. The team at that workshop basically had a chance to say, here's the project, here's what we as people on the project might perceive the risks. I think they were simulating on a hospital that is to be built in an urban environment. And what do they think the risks of that project might be? And what very quickly came out was when we asked the question, do you think you have got all the risks covered in what you've done so far? Bit of a cheeky question because we gave everyone 15 minutes to do that. But of course, the resounding answer was no, we didn't have enough time to do that. And that there was a concern that there was an observation that there was no consensus being brought into the room. So one person thought that removing asbestos would take, 3 months, and the other person that if the asbestos was discovered, it would create a 3-month delay. And the other person said it could take 2 days it could only be a 2-day delay, right? Those are very big ranges that you would find. And so what we then did was we then plugged the project through the nplan system. The people team sat back while the algorithms produced the results. And we looked at what actually the risks of that project were. We know this because this project is a finished project. So we know what the actual results what actually happened on the ground on that project. And we could actually see how this matched our knowledge and biases that we had when we were perceiving the risk from the cold outside. So from the cold outside, there was, everyone used their own experiences to guide them without really being able to tap into the experiences of the collective, or the experiences of, when I think of the collective, I mean the entire world. I'll tell you the rest of what happened in the workshop in a couple of slides. So in the real world, I guess in the business world, in the not workshop world, there are a couple of organizations that like using nplan. One of them is in the UK, a company called Network Rail, and they did a little press article a couple of months ago about how they're using nplan, which you can find on the Network Rail website, or it'll be a hyperlink in my slides as well. But basically, there's a large project that's still going through the approval processes. It's known as the outline business case approval, and they needed a mechanism to give Parliament, who would ultimately be responsible for public money spent here in the UK, a sense of assurance that we, as the project team, have really understood our risks and we know what we're talking about here. And pardon my words, but there's no bullshit in what we have just submitted to you. You may want to bleep that out, Sarah, if that's not appropriate for this conference. And it is actually a genuine challenge that when you are the sponsoring body looking down onto a project, how do you know that you're not receiving rubbish? How do you know that the people on the project have actually considered all of their risks in a holistic way? A genuine challenge that exists probably no matter how big your project is or which country you're doing it in. So by simply flagging what might happen next on their project, the cost saving of being able to avoid a very expensive remediation work if something goes wrong is often dramatic and in the hundreds of millions of pounds. And the same or similar story happened in Canada on an oil and gas project called LNG Canada. It is a whopper of a project at a cool $40 billion being invested into British Columbia. I think it's the largest infrastructure project going on in Canada at the moment. And again, 30,000 activities going on in their schedule. How do you know which fires are worth fighting? This project, thankfully, there are no actual fires on this project, given it's a gas plant, but there are lots of things going wrong all the time on the project. So how do you give the executive team and the project team a sense of where to focus their efforts? And again, this is where being objective about it and making sure that you have a big view of the land really shines through. I'm going to skip over these slides. These are basically numbers around the things that can happen and tell you a little bit about what happened in the workshop. I'm going to stop sharing my slide. So one of the things that the team found was that it was surprisingly easy once you know where to fish. When you start the thing and you're like, tell me what risks might exist on this hospital, people are like, oh, I don't know, asbestos. And it's a bit unnerving when you have such a broad range brought to your feet. When the algorithm effectively did the analysis for the team and said, hey, these are the risks. We don't know what's causing it. The algorithm was saying, we don't know what's causing it, but here are your big hitting risks that exist for the scope of work that you're presented with. The team that was looking at that were able to then dive to the next level, which frankly is far more valuable as the human mind, which is, so how would we handle such a mitigation strategy? So if you're saying that handling the permits is going to be a risky thing to execute on this project, how might we mitigate that risk? That is typically non-trivial. Reducing the risk of permit delays is typically not something you just like open your drawer and you're like, aha, I know the secret to do this always. It involves, picking up the phone and chatting to other people on the project, which is something most humans are very good at doing, actually. And this feeling that it's far more effective for a person to spend time thinking about what to mitigate and how to mitigate it than what are the things that I ought to be thinking about to mitigate. So in effect, you reverse the sequence and you spend 90% of your time in risk mitigation and 10% of your time in risk analysis. And that's where it becomes man plus machine, right? Or woman plus machine. And you have a wonderful mixture where the machines are now doing the deep, dirty, detailed analysis for you, and you are now doing the cognitive, people-based work in negotiating the mitigation plans that need to be put in place for such projects. I'll pause it there. I think I have run a little bit over my little 10-minute spiel time, but would love to open up to any questions that might be on the chat, or is it open?
Yeah, so I think everybody, if you can please put your hands together and say a massive thank you to Dev and his team, not only for his talk just now, but also for running that workshop that we ran over the last couple of hours. So massive thank you to you and your team, Dev. That was brilliant. Just a quick question. There are lots of questions, by the way, coming in both on the Q&A and the chat. So I'll leave you to address these directly, actually. So feel free to go into the chat and look at all of those. With regards to all of this, Dev, you know how you're saying if you help people to know where to go and fish, is that something there where within nplan, that's one of the secret agents it brings to bear, is helping people to say, okay, actually it's this thing over here that you need to be looking at? Or, you know, how do you help people to focus in on those particular areas?
Yeah, so I tried to use my words quite carefully, which is show people where to fish, but don't go fishing for them, right? Okay. If anyone's a fan of fishing, you'll know that if you didn't catch it, then it's just not fun. And it's a pretty boring day if you go out there and you don't catch anything yourself. So, but if someone told you, if you fished in that area, that suddenly the game suddenly becomes quite interesting. To put that in specific context about nplan and risk analysis though, what we do is effectively help sort the entirety of the project by activity and rank them as to, based on all the past data we've analyzed and the project that is now in question, here's how we would model the amount of risk being carried at an activity level, which is the lowest level of detail you can get into at a single project. Of course, activities can roll upwards, right? So if you're the big boss of the project, you don't really care about, tell me about what's going to happen to digging that one trench over there. Maybe someone on the project ought to care about that. You could get the rolled up version of these analysis, but if you are in the detail and you are required to find mitigation work at that work phase level, the tool will tell you exactly how much risk exists there. So it sort of helps combat the thing that, you know, Bob thinks it's 50 days and Jane thinks it's 70 days. You know, what is it really? Is Jane correct or is Bob correct? And you certainly wouldn't want to take sides in making that decision. But instead, let's just use the machine to tell us what's probably the way it might be handled.
Brilliant. No, thank you for that, Dev. So I think just in summary, and again, there are loads of questions and they're still coming in, so I'm sure that you'll be able to get them in the written format. But just to summarize that, am I correct in saying that actually nobody won in terms of human versus machine, or in fact, actually what really won is when you combine both of us together? Is that correct?
Yes, we did give out prizes, but there was a sense, the prizes were for people, for the team that identified the most effective risk mitigation actions and thereby pulling the project in early. That said, hospital was on track to be dramatically delayed. And so the team that had the best mitigation actions won a prize.